Welcome to Psychic Girls Next Door. We are your hosts, Shannon Miller
and Lili. This podcast is for all spirituality enthusiasts and psychics next door to share tools, experiences, and spiritual practices that align with your highest vibrational self. So in this episode, we will be sharing how we trust our own information. And have we always trusted ourselves? And how do you know if it is fear or your intuition? Oh, that's a big question.
That's a good question. Yeah. I would love to know about, if your experiences from, as far back as you want to go, like when you were a kid or, and how if there's any difference of how you have figured out how to trust your own information.
Yeah. So just looking at my childhood, I had a lot of invalidation around trusting my own information. As you guys have probably hopefully listened to our episode 1, and we share how we, naturally evolve with our psychic abilities. I didn't feel safe sharing any of that, things that I was seeing, things that I that I was learning, or things that I wanted to express, because I was shamed, criticized, punished a lot of times. So I didn't have a lot of room to trust my own information, because for me it meant that it was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. You're feeling invalidated.
Very, very invalidating. And I was very reliant on others because I couldn't trust myself. I was always very dependent on other people's opinions. If they're doing this, I'm going to do it too. So, and I think, of course, this is normal too, as you're kind of trying to figure out yourself.
When you're a kid and in teenagehood.
Yes, your surroundings, you don't know a lot about yourself and that phase. But as I went through even my young adulthood too, I was still very much into, I've been in this pattern of people pleasing. And I think it kind of stems a lot from that. Never wanting people to be upset at me, or being in a situation where people are judging me. So I always was so hyper vigilant about this stuff. Therefore, of course, you ignore all your little nuggets, your intuitive
nudges of oh, you feel uncomfortable in this situation.
Yeah, this is not for you.
Right.
But you keep insisting because, people keep telling you, oh, you should do this and that. So I was kind of codependent, I want to say, on a lot of other people's opinions and information. And when you trust other people's information, the outcome is never great.
No, because it's someone else's. It's
not yours.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways I would just self-abandon myself in those situations, because I at a lot of situations, and the one that I remember the most, maybe I want to say it happened, maybe 10 years ago. I was in a space where I had my own studio when I lived in LA. And I have this friend of mine that wanted to move out of his apartment, which was way more expensive than mine. And he convinced me to move in and take over his apartment, because he was moving out and he was maybe planning to come back, but he wasn't sure. And he was and I don't know if it's out of insecurity, naive. I don't know what it was, but I trusted him. And I thought, and in my heart, I knew it. I just knew it was not a good decision. And he's well, I'm going to help you pay half of the rent, because it was double what I was paying my studio. And it was in an area, in the valley. If you're familiar with LA, so it was in the valley. It was far away from all the jobs that I had at the time. But I was and I asked other people. I was what do you think? So I would always ask others, what's your opinion? People oh, you should do it. And I ended up doing it. And it was one of the worst things that I've ever done.
Oh, no.
One, because I was in this location, was far away from everything. And at a certain point, I think after 6 months, my friend was well, I'm not going to pay half of the rent anymore because I'm not going to go back. And because he moved out of town, and I was like stuck with this place where rent was like ridiculous, and I hated the place. The place was actually beautiful. The apartment was gorgeous. The apartment was huge, but I was like, this is unnecessary. And I was just unhappy, and I was barely making ends meet. I didn't have like an actual like stable job. I was like in a really difficult situation, but again, didn't trust myself.
Yeah, like how did he convince you to do that when like your body and your probably every part of you was saying like don't do it?
Yeah, and you just get into the space where you just
sorry about that.
Where you just like in the space where you're just so out of touch with yourself that whatever people will tell you, they're able to convince you and manipulate you, because I wasn't connected with myself at all. I didn't know myself that way. I was very much into really all my experiences where I was also always seeking validation from others. Always like seeking their opinions, their validation. What are people going to think of me, and this type of stuff. And it was such an exhausting way of living.
It's very external. Like
yes. And I was just so
clogging your space.
Disconnected. I was just very disconnected. And I was judging myself very harshly too, going through those situations. So this was just like one of the many.
No, this paints a good picture though.
One of many situations where I didn't trust my own information. And I think it's been a journey, trusting my own intuition. And I think it's been a process. It's been hard. I'm not gonna lie that it's just like, it's just easy. You just like tap it in and it's like,
no, because the people who are used to you relying on their information, if there has been a pattern of like you going to them for advice or, constantly seeking their approval or affirmation in any way, as soon as you shift that dynamic and stop doing that, it's almost like it had become like a codependent habit, at least from my experience, where like I was, when I started doing the work with Psychic Horizons, the clairvoyant training program, I was so outside of my body, like searching for validation.
Same.
And just like, affirmation from anyone about, really just myself. And I think I was like when I moved to the city in 2013 in like the fall, I was like, I'm going to get a boyfriend. And I really wanted a boyfriend. And like, I, hop skipped around and dated. And like, it was like me constantly searching for this, like, my ball of self-love, right? Where like I was like, somebody is going to fulfill that for me. Like, and it's not true. Like that is, I learned the hard way of like dating and hooking up with people for the sake of thinking that they would fall in love with me, and then I would feel like finally validated in some way. And that narrative, it took me my entire training program to really clean that out. And I still, after the training program, I was cleaning out, like, it's just the residue of having that pattern and that belief of like, needing, a partner to validate you in some way, or like you feeling like this, this societal narrative of like, people feeling empty without a partner, or like looking for their better half, or like all those like things that come up. And my sense of like abandoning myself was really on that journey to like find a romantic partner.
Well, do you think this has to do with how you brought up?
Yes, I think so. I think from early on, I felt like I've had to be a parent in my family, because there's the parent role, there's the child role, and then, the individual, right? And I felt like, my dad is definitely a parental figure. My mom and I feel like more like we're friends, which is nice, and it's beautiful now that I'm an adult. But I think like when you realize like, I got to take care of things, or like, I might not be getting like, the types of emotional validation or attention, like, and then my sister, love her, but she was very demanding, and she demanded like love and affection and attention. And what's interesting is I had an angel reader. I can't even get her information. I think I've talked about it before on an episode. But she, practices out of Clarksburg. I don't even know if she's still practicing, but that was my first spiritual experience. And she said that my grandma was there. My grandma died on Halloween, and I've talked about her a little bit before. And so she was giving her this information of like, oh yeah, you would like give up all of your personal needs because your sister demanded everything from your parents.
So your needs were unmatched.
Yes.
As a child.
Yes. And so I became very like kind of closed off to just speaking what I needed, and it really affected me, and it's still affecting me now, and that's what I'm trying to heal. Trying is also, whenever you try too hard, it's like you're gonna meet some resistance, but that's what I'm working on, right? Just addressing that it's really hard for me to voice my needs in any type of relationship where I feel like if I feel any type of dependency, or if I care a lot what the other person thinks, or if I feel like the outcome is going to be negative or like not go in my favor, I will just try to figure it out on my own. And because
I learned
that I had to do that.
That's what you had to do to survive.
Yeah.
Just to be independent and on your own.
Yes.
Because you couldn't count on anyone else.
Exactly. That narrative of like, oh, I can't really count on other people because I just could feel the energy. Like I didn't feel like I could count on people. And I mean, I always had food on the table, for my survival needs were met. But in terms of my emotional needs, like I was the sensitive child, and I was like, but it wasn't, I stopped showing that. Like whenever I was deeply hurt or felt really rejected, like those are my core wounds of when I feel deeply rejected and deeply hurt and like deeply not considered by others, because I let myself care about them and let myself feel a need for their validation or a need for that.
Yeah, but as a child, you just do what you have to do.
Oh yeah,
in order to survive.
Exactly.
And I think, as you can tell from our stories, a lot of these patterns, they stem from our childhood.
Yeah.
Wounds and traumas. And for me, one of the biggest ways of like relearning, right, how to trust myself was to become aware. And I think you talking about all these things, and myself also talking about our experiences, becoming aware. Where did it start? Why? Why I have a hard time trusting myself? And that's a question that I think I've been asked a lot. As I teach people how to trust themselves, because students will ask me questions. I'm like, well, ask yourself and just trust that information. And a lot of people say, well, it's hard.
Like something might not come up. Or,
and
you're drawing a blank.
People have a lot of judgment or resistance around, but why is it so hard? So you kind of have to ask yourself why. Why is it hard to trust yourself? Because if you look at your life, I'm sure there's like a lot of moments when your intuition was right, but sometimes we decide to go the other way.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we all have stories like that. Ooh, I shouldn't have done that because my gut or my intuition was telling
Just had to learn the hard way.
Exactly. There we go again.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, you look that there's also a pattern, also how your intuition speaks to you. And sometimes it might not be like there's like a big red light like showing you. It might be very subtle, the way that your intuition like communicates with you.
It's like a muscle in your body.
Yeah, because your intuition is basically like your GPS. That's how I say it. It's just kind of how it guides you. It kind of, shows you how to move in this physical world, because majority of time we are always in our analytical minds. We're always like thinking and analyzing things and going through a laundry list. So there's not a lot of space for us to be in the space of our intuitive, where we can tap into intuitive abilities. And that doesn't happen when your mind is busy.
No.
When you're busy.
Yeah. It feels like when you're thinking about things constantly, your body is going to send you a signal. Like if you're in, let's just say, if I were to walk in, I wouldn't do this, but if I were to walk down in Soma at night, like my intuition would be like, girl, get the hell out of there. Like, go
for
home.
People that are not familiar with San Francisco, it's an area that is...
You don't want to be walking as a woman or anyone.
Yes. It's not a very safe area.
It's not a very safe area. It's like the Tenderloin similar. I mean, it's just gotten bad. I think it's even gotten worse since the pandemic, but not to be super bleak about San Francisco. But it'd be like if you know that it'd be like being in a dangerous environment without knowing you're in a dangerous environment, and then your intuition will send you a ping. Usually it's a gut feeling. Like they talk about this idea of a gut feeling, and that's how I'm able to now tap into my own information of like, and this is something that Veronica from the Center from the New Age, she encouraged me in the reading as a tool, and I'm hoping that all you listeners will take this on as well. Of like, if it feels tense, or like if someone's like kind of taking your stomach and kind of like twisting it around, like that is a signal of like, no, it is not for you. The situation, the person, the place, wherever you're at. If you're making a decision about food, it could be as simple as like, what are you going to have for dinner? Do you want Chinese or Mexican? And then you feel in your body if there's any tension, then that might be a signal for a no. If it feels neutral, then that's great. Like you go for the gold. And then how I discern if it's a yes for me, I get really excited and I feel lighter. Like I feel like my energy gets a little bit more of like a higher frequency, and it just kind of feels like an inspirational idea.
So that's, you think it would be how you discern intuition from fear.
Yeah, exactly. Intuition from fear. Because the fear is, whenever I get like fearful on a body level, that I see that more as my intuition. But when I get fearful in my mind, that's like me kind of over analyzing how things might not go well, or kind of getting in a narrative of like doom and gloom narratives, right? Like they happen, they pop up, and like a lot of people experience them. And if you do, like for me, I'm currently going through this dark wave of figuring out my next financial career or my financial opportunities. And so I'm going in my survival pictures of like, in my first chakra at the base of your spine, like that's all about survival, health, wellness, like abundance, all of that. And so whenever I get in that narrative of worrying about it and like the outcome in the future, like that for me is like my anxiety of like my lack, mindset, or like not feeling like I'm going to have enough in the future, or like trust my own information. It's me relying on this idea that things won't work out, or like this like idea that, I won't get what I want. And
yeah, because a lot of people have a hard time. It's just like discerning between the fear, the anxiety, and your actual intuition. And some people, they get a little stuck in that space too. Yeah. For me, it's also just, I think the more also you know yourself, the more you're also able to discern.
Yeah.
Say, for example, because for some people, and I'm going to tell from my own experience, sometimes I don't feel a physical reaction in my body, like gut feelings. Sometimes I don't. I just have this knowingness that just comes through, and it's just, no, this is the path that you should take, or this is the decision you should make. That's how it comes for me. So I think for different people, intuition also kind of shows up in different ways. But I do sometimes have that gut feeling too, you know, where my body is also communicating. But I also feel that the more you are able to know how you react to things
Yeah.
and how you respond to things, the more you're able to like tell apart. Oh, I think just my ego. Maybe my ego is just getting in the way of these decisions because it's trying to control.
Right. And
or maybe it's that thought of like, oh, nothing good ever happens to me. Therefore, you're kind of overriding your intuition, but just kind of maybe you're sabotaging yourself too.
right.
So I think one of the best ways to know yourself is you just have to practice.
Yeah.
It's just like as the same thing as you get to know someone else, you're going to ask questions to that person.
Mm-hmm.
You want to spend time with them. It's the same thing you're going to do with yourself. It's just like spend time with yourself and ask yourself questions.
Right.
Right? Like, and I think spending time with yourself, it's more beneficial to be in the state of a quiet mind and just finding moments during your day. And again, you have to create those moments.
You do. You have to create space.
You have to create space. It's not like, oh, it's going to happen. No, create the space just to quiet your mind, even if it's like for 2 minutes. Just put in your timer, 2 minutes. Quiet your mind, close your eyes, connect with your breath, and just check in and just say, hey, hi. How are you today? How are you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling tired. Okay. And just kind of acknowledging that and if you do this with consistency, the more you get to know how your body's feeling, then you'll be able to recognize the signs as you're moving ahead with life when you have to make decisions or make choices. But it's just really being in the space of where you just notice things and you're observing. But you have to kind of allow yourself just to feel it too.
You do. And I like that you brought up the mental knowingness, like, because I'll get information too where I'm just like, no, that's not for me. Like, and it's taken me up until my whole time I've been on this earth.
It has been a lifetime.
Right. I love our entire lives of figuring out like, no, that's not for me. Like being able to, I feel like instantly, like when you get that like internal no, whether it's from your mind or your body, it's a no. And you just like being able to say no to others can be challenging.
Yes.
Especially if you have people pleasing tendencies, if you are an empath or, sensitive to how others are going to feel or perceive your no as a sense of rejection in some way. Like that's an old pattern that I had to unlearn of, that this is not a reflection on me. It's me looking out for myself and me trusting my own information of like what is going to be the best for me in the situation, and not coming from a place of selfishness, but coming from a place of like almost like higher knowingness.
And setting boundaries.
Setting boundaries, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Boundaries was an interesting concept that the first time that I heard is when we started our meditation training. I didn't even know boundaries existed. Yeah. I'm like, wait, you can say no to people? Wait, I was just like, for me, it was just mind blowing because boundaries are very recent concept that people have been talking about. I mean, I don't think I've heard it growing up. And for me, it was incredible. Just the fact, as you mentioned, just saying no to things that don't feel right.
Yeah.
Or they are no longer serving you. And for me, it changed my whole life. Because I would always like say yes to things that I didn't want to do or places I didn't want to go.
Right.
And I've been in that space.
For the sake of being part of the
part of the gang.
Part of the
what are they gonna think if I don't go to that birthday party?
Right. Will they invite me again? Like,
they're not gonna like me anymore.
Right.
So it's just this whole narrative. And I think when I started really asking myself, do I want to go? And the answer is no. It's actually, to me, it's an act of self-love.
Oh yeah.
And preserving myself and my energy.
Yeah.
And once I started doing that, my whole world changed. It was just like so life changing, just a simple concept. And I think for me, the biggest take, it was feeling empowered, because you start claiming your power back to yourself.
Yeah.
And it's just an awesome place to be, where you have your personal power. Therefore, trusting yourself, it just comes as second nature.
Yeah. I feel like I still have a hard time in some situations setting boundaries.
Oh, it's hard.
It is. It's an ongoing practice. Like,
it is. It's not
yeah.
going to come. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Let me just say that.
As someone like who is, you know, struggling with setting boundaries and like changing, because a lot of the times, like when you do set the boundary for the first time, like the other person who isn't used to that, like a lot of the times, like when I was dating and going on these dates, I don't have boundaries with men. I really don't. I don't know what that looks like, and that's why I'm not dating right now. Avoiding that situation completely. But like, you know, for someone who I feel like I have boundaries everywhere else now. But like when it comes to this idea of like finding my soulmate or like the love of my life, I see like I have some work to do around like what does that really look like for me, and like what are those boundaries for myself, and like make sure I protect my own sacred space that I've built up and like cleaned out and made room for. So up until this point. But like, you know, what advice would you give to people who are setting boundaries, not just like in dating situations, but like in every situation? Like how would you go about doing that?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience. I think it all starts with yourself.
Yeah.
Setting boundaries with yourself, as we've mentioned, just say no to things that they don't feel right. I think that's the first step. Just setting boundaries yourself, because everything else is just a projection of how you set your own boundaries. But as I've mentioned, it's not easy, because I struggle with feeling guilt. I would set boundaries, especially family members.
Oh,
I think family.
That's a good way to practice, because they're kind of stuck with you regardless.
I mean, it's just not the easiest, because family's family. And, you know, and you probably, if you grew up like me in a family where no boundaries were taught and we didn't have any boundaries, there's no such thing as boundaries. When you start to place boundaries, I got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of judgments like, oh, who do you think you are? And don't talk to me like this. So I got a lot of pushback and judgment towards me, a lot of shaming, criticism. But at the end of the day, you have to remind yourself why you're doing this. What is your intention as you are setting the boundaries? In my case, I wanted to be true to myself, and I wanted to preserve my own sanity, because it was just like my whole life, it was just out of control, because I didn't have boundaries. I didn't trust myself. Therefore, it was controlled by other people's information. And that's not a great way to live when you're in that state. But you start always with yourself, and you have to practice. It's practice, practice, practice. And it's like a muscle, you know, like the same way you go to the gym, you know, you want to get stronger, and you have to be consistent with it, but like small steps. And it's not going to be perfect. There are days when you're going to be, okay, I've set a boundary, I said no, and there might be days where we kind of like, a little
bit flexible and
like, maybe I'm lenient. More lenient, not as rigid. So it's kind of a dance, I think. There's also a great book, I will leave it in the show notes, that is by this, I think she's a therapist, if I'm not mistaken. Her name is Terry Cole, and she has a book called The Boundary Boss.
Ooh.
She has a great Instagram account, and she talks all about boundaries. So she's a specialist. So if I would recommend someone, I would definitely recommend checking her out. And I got a lot of information from just like listening to her and reading her posts on social media, and she gives a lot of like prompts when people come to you and they might say something that is very unpleasant, and you want to set a boundary, what to say back. So it's very helpful.
Oh, that's good.
And I love that, because it also helps me to know, like, I'm prepared, right?
Yeah.
If this happens, I know what to say.
Yeah, like tangible examples. It's like a good framework to use.
But one of the my favorite phrases when everyone asks me, whatever it is, if I want to go out, if I have the time or the space to do this and that, it's always like, let me get back to you.
Oh, that's a good phrase.
I will never say yes or no, like right there and then. Let me think about it.
Yeah.
Let me get back to you, because it gives you space.
Yeah. Because sometimes I get really excited immediately. Like, yes. And then I am someone where I'm like, I'm a very feelings-based person of like, oh, shoot, I said yes like 3 weeks ago, and now I don't feel inspired to do that. Or like, my mind has changed, but then like, how do I get out of the situation?
But then you're hoping the other person cancels.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You're hoping they cancel. And like, for me, I'm like, anytime anyone cancels on me, I get my own time back. Like, that's a beautiful thing. But like, I just feel like, oh, shoot, like if I felt obligated in any way, and I feel like maybe that's something that we should start looking at. Like, why do you feel obligated?
Yeah, that's a great start point.
Yeah. Because, like, you're not really obligated to do anything unless it's like, unless you have pets where you have to feed them. And obviously, children, like, please take care of them. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like anything else, like special occasions, engagement with friends, like all of that, like, that's something that where I have been able to practice saying no and setting boundaries, especially when going out. I used to go out all the time, and now I never go out. And I think the pandemic actually presented a really great opportunity for people to shift their lives. I know there's been a lot of negative impacts of the pandemic, and I'm not dismissing those at all. But I think for people who have been able to be healthy and, cut bad habits out that were no longer serving them before the pandemic happened. And for me, that was saying yes to absolutely every social engagement, just to be part of it and experience it, and like be in photos on social media, and like, make connections, where I love doing that. But now that I've, the pandemic forced me to not do that. And now I'm very discerning with how I spend my time and who I spend my time with.
Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful thing that, the last 2.5 years also brought us to, is like, what are our priorities? Mm-hmm. And I'm the same way. I am very selective where I put my energy and my time.
Yeah.
Because I think my time and my energy, they're sacred. And not a lot of people should have access to that. And I am going to charge for people to have access, like a lot of money.
Yeah, I love that. $5 to spend any time with me. No, maybe not $5. I'm worth a little bit more than that. But yeah, I love that idea. That's so funny. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Psychic Girls Next Door. We hope that you've gotten valuable insights on how you can trust your own information and pay attention to those pings inside, the internal nudges, the like taps on your shoulder, whatever it is that you feel, or just like if information comes through clearly, and if it's a no, it's a no. And trust that. Make sure you feel okay with it. But we really appreciate you listening. And if you liked this episode, feel free to give us a rating on any of the podcast streaming platforms. Submit your questions to us online. You can email us at psychicgirlsnextdoor@gmail.com.
Follow us on Instagram.
Yes, you can also DM us on Instagram. We want to know any questions and any sources that you have out there for other listeners. That would be great.
And we hope to see you on our next episode. And you have a great day. Bye-bye.